It really happened, Springbok fans. It really happened. A fourth world title. Welcome back to the channel. I was last speaking to you from outside the Stade de France just after South Africa had lifted the trophy. It was raining, the weather was a bit miserable, but I was trying to make sense of that final that we saw yesterday. I've now had a little bit of time to recover and ponder it. I still feel like my brain's a little bit scrambled, but that's what I'm going to reflect upon in this video. That World Cup win, the final itself, the small margins in it, and some of the individual players, although it was certainly a collective squad effort. So let me know your thoughts on it. Let me know what you made of it in the comments section. You've all now had more time to reflect on it, to digest it, to think about it. So comment down below, make sure you like the video, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well. But let's get into it. So before I properly get started, I should say just one more time, I mentioned it at the end of the video yesterday, but once again, just a thank you really. It feels weird to be getting towards the end of the World Cup because the interest in the channel, the growth of the channel, the engagement we've had over the last 7 weeks or so has just been absolutely amazing, genuinely quite humbling really to see the interaction that we've been able to build, and I hope we're able to keep building. I think this certainly isn't it, although I'm aware that when it's not international windows, the interest probably drops off a little bit. But for those of you that have liked videos, that have commented, that have shared them, all that sort of stuff, then it has been a privilege being out here. It's been so much fun. So thank you once again. And even things like super thanks and super chat, I got a couple of those come through the other day. That's just ridiculously humbling that people are willing to make that effort to say thanks, essentially. So to those of you that have done that, thank you. And to all those of you that have watched, thank you once again. But let's then get into the final. It was an excellent final, wasn't it? I'm interested to know on this. I saw a few comments of people saying that it was a rubbish game and this and that, and it was a strange one. I think it was an excellent final. I don't think it was the final that many of us expected, partly to do with the weather. Maybe we expected it to be a little bit more open, but I think the conditions played a real part in it just being such an arm wrestle. But Alex Lowe, the journalist from The Times, he put a tweet up after the game, which I think is so true, that how can so much be packed into a game that finished 12-11? There were so many incidences, so many things that you feel are a key moment. And after the first 40 minutes, I was probably sat there in the Stade de France at half-time and thinking, oh, I really am worried this is going to be a bit of a damp squib, because the first 40 minutes, you felt like both teams were kind of growing into the game. You thought the game itself was trying to evolve. But the second half, man, as I said after the full-time whistle, I've never been so nervous, I don't think, for watching a game that I wasn't supporting either team in. My heart was going. I can only imagine what it must have been like for All Blacks fans and for the Springbok fans. So I think it was an excellent final. I don't think it's necessarily the best final ever, but actually, thinking back on World Cup finals, 2019, Springboks loved it, but maybe wasn't the best game. They ran away with it in the end. 2015, likewise, New Zealand ran away with it against Australia at Twickenham. 2011 was very tense and nervy, that final in New Zealand. 2007, Stade de France, not too bad. But again, actually, I think you do have to go back quite a way until we've had a final of that drama. You may disagree with that. You can let me know. But yeah, I thought the final was excellent. And as I said in my video, it's about small margins. The amount of moments in that game that you just feel are pivotal, that it could have changed on. And the ability to win by small margins is a massive credit to the Springboks in this World Cup. Winning your quarter-final, your semi-final and your final by a single point. That is ridiculous. Particularly when you then consider that they had to come through a pool with Ireland and Scotland as well. The way the Springboks have been able to get themselves through these tight games is incredibly impressive, and maybe a reflection of how they have developed. I don't know, I look back to that defeat to France in Marseille last year, where it was a close game but they couldn't quite get over the line. I look back to even the defeat to Wales in the second test when South Africa won the series on home soil 2-1. I know they made 15 changes for that second test. They were rotating the squad, they were working on the depth of the whole squad, but even so, a tight game that Wales were able to win. I know the Springboks did have narrow wins as well over that time, but yeah, I think to be able to go back to back to back with those tight margin sort of games is really impressive and does speak to the resilience of this Springbok team, not just in terms of the results that they've had to get, but Mbonambi goes down after the opening couple of minutes. You have Dion Fourie coming off the bench playing whatever it was, 76 minutes of a World Cup final when he only made his Springboks debut in 2022, well on into his 30s, but it doesn't bother them. He's able to deal with it. Even look at some of the other games where Marnie Libbok maybe hasn't been kicking as well as he would have liked to. They're still able to deal with it. Whatever gets thrown at this team, they're able to deal with. And I think it's a resilience that isn't just luck. I don't quite know exactly how they work on it, but you feel like the experiences that they've gone through, their preparation, so much has gone into making this side the resilient team that they are. And that was a huge, massive reason for why they ended up winning this World Cup. And I did want to mention a couple of individual players. As I say, it's hard to, isn't it? I mean, so many good performances, particularly in these knockout stages. One I've just mentioned in Dion Fourie. What a story that is. What a brilliant story. Isn't it great how the World Cup and rugby can throw up these unbelievable stories? Stephen Donald, 2011. All Black fly half comes in, he's on a fishing trip, has to fill in for all the injuries they've had to deal with. They have the best fly half in the world in Dan Carter's out injured. Next guy's injured. He comes in and he kicks the winning points in a World Cup final. And Dion Fourie's a story which kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I know he's not kicking the winning points in the way that a fly half would, but to be there at hooker when you're a back row, to have had to wait a long time in his career to get an opportunity in the Springboks, and then to be able to deliver and perform in the way he did was exceptional. And actually speaks wider to the way in which I think Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus have developed this squad. Jean Klein for Ireland coming back and taking an opportunity. Dion Fourie is a really good example as well. Quagga Smith, who kind of came from sevens, got into the team a few years ago and then since then looks absolutely pivotal. It seems like they're able to squeeze every last drop of talent and ability out of these players at the moment. And that comes down to good coaching, comes down to good setup and lots of other things behind the scene. And Peter Steph du Toit is another one. He is a big game player. Exceptional in 2019, ended up winning World Player of the Year and brilliant in the final, a Player of the Match award, record amount of tackles in a final, smoking people. Must just be brutal to come up against him. I can't imagine what it must be like when you're having to face him and he's in that sort of form. He's in your face, he's physical, incredibly good rugby player. He was really impressive as well. And we could keep going through the team. I mean, Siya Kolisi, everyone will wax lyrical about him as a leader, as an inspiration, as the kind of figure he is for South Africa, which I can only see from outside. Many of you watching this will have a much better understanding than I probably will ever have, but it's still so obvious in the way in which he talks and inspires, and also just what a character he is in the game. You know, I think he is, especially now, even before the result last night probably, but particularly now being a double World Cup winning captain, he is up there with the great names of the game, I think, when we'll look back on it. And when we talk about a Jonah Lomu, a Richie McCaw, a Siya Kolisi, I think he's in that sort of discussion for his impact, his significance for the game of rugby. I wanted to mention the All Blacks as well. I suppose if you are an All Blacks fan, well done for getting this far in the video when it's been all about the Springboks and you're probably still pretty sore when you lose a World Cup final by 1 point. I do think it was an excellent World Cup for New Zealand though. When you consider where they were to where they ended up getting to, that performance against Ireland is an all-time great All Blacks performance with all-time great individual performances within it. I thought Sam Cane and Ian Foster, for all the issues there have been for New Zealand in terms of results over the last few years, have held themselves with absolute class, particularly in the post-match last night where they weren't particularly drawn on officiating decisions or things that they could have had gripes about or moans about. They didn't really go down that line. I have a huge amount of respect for that when you're hurting so brutally and have to face the media and face the world so quickly afterwards. But there are still moments of that game that I think the All Blacks will look at and just feel like they wish they could have them back. And I know that happens in every game. In fact, the Springboks probably have some in this game as well. As I've said, it's about fine margins. But when you're on the losing side, I think it magnifies that. And there are a few different ones. The fact that they haven't tried a drop goal was something that was flagged to me earlier. And I hadn't really thought about, but they don't tend to seem to go for it, do they, New Zealand? They always push for the try, but in a game like that, pretty tough conditions, World Cup final, do you take the points? And speaking of taking the points, when it was 12-6 and they repeatedly kicked into the corner, I think they did it because Sia Khaleesi was in the sin bin, so it was a period in the game where they were level of 14 men apiece, and maybe they felt they needed to make the most of that moment. But again, do you just take the points, build the score, chip away at it in that sort of game? The other thing as well, which I don't know the answer to, was Aaron Smith coming off. And it could well be, I mean, they'll have all the stats and metrics up in the coaches' boxes, and maybe they were seeing the data suggesting that Smith's performance was starting to drop. But I just felt when Finlay Christie came on, for that bigger moment, that bigger game, that sort of occasion, it was too big a drop-off in quality. And I think Aaron Smith needed to be on if he was capable of it. Maybe they had the data and they said, he's declining, we have to change, he's not going to be able to go the 80. But I just felt like I was interested. I suppose I'm interested in that. You can't be too critical of it because we don't have all the information, but I was interested what motivated that decision, what went into making that decision. And we could probably go on for ages, right? It is a final. We could go through from minute 1 to minute 80 and pick out tiny moments. Maybe one day, eventually I will. I think I'll let the dust settle on it a little bit more. I think it's going to be a really fun game to look back on and watch and reanalyse and go back through and enjoy it all again. But that's probably maybe for a year or so. For me anyway, Springbok fans are probably already watching it on repeat. So I'll leave it there. Drop a comment down below. Let me know what you make of anything I've touched upon in this video. South African fans, what have your celebrations been like over the last, not even 24 hours yet, whatever it is, over the last 18 hours, whatever, what have your celebrations been like? How have you been enjoying yourselves? Soak up the fact that you have won 4 World Cup titles. Half the World Cups that South Africa have entered. Brilliant. Thank you once again. I head home to the UK tomorrow, so maybe I'll do a video here in Paris, a final au revoir possibly, just to say goodbye. But yeah, drop a comment down below, like the video, make sure you're subscribed, to the channel, that helps me out hugely. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.